Hi there, it's Diane. Welcome to my basement. Today, we're going to be learning about rounding decimals. It's in your workbook, page 59. So last time we met, we were talking about rounding natural numbers. Let's do a quick review of rounding natural numbers. So here it says, estimate these total flight distances. Show your rounded numbers. So let's say we go on a flight and we're starting in Toronto and we're flying to Winnipeg. We have flown 1,518 kilometers. We're going to have a layover in Winnipeg and then we're going to fly to Calgary, and that distance is 1,208 kilometers. What if I wanted to round my total flight distance? You can do it, I can think of two different ways. Maybe you can think of more. The first way I was thinking is that we can round 1,518 to the nearest hundred position, then round 1,208 to the nearest hundred position, and then we can add those two numbers together. Let's try that. So if I was to round 1,518 to the nearest hundreds position, I circle my hundreds position, the 5. I look to the right, it's a 1. So it tells me my 5 stays the same. So I would say that I would travel 1,500 kilometers from Toronto to Winnipeg. If I want to go from Winnipeg to Calgary, I find my hundreds position, it's the 2. I look to the right, it's a 0. So I know my 2 has to stay the same. And then the two numbers on the right, I put zeros. So I know that my trip from Winnipeg to Calgary is going to be approximately, or I'm going to estimate it by rounding to 1,200 kilometers. Now, if I wanted to find the total kilometers for my trip, I would add my numbers, 0 plus 0 is 0, 0 plus 0 is 0, 5 plus 2 is 7, 1 plus 1 is 2. So I could say that my trip from Toronto to Winnipeg and Winnipeg to Calgary is going to be about 2,700 kilometers. Now the other way I was thinking is I could add my 2 kilometers first and then round them. So let's add 8 plus 8 is 16. 6 in my ones or units column. Bring up my 10. 1 plus 1 is 2. 5 plus 2 is 7. And 1 plus 1 is 2. And now I can estimate 2,726 kilometers. I'm going to look in my hundreds column. It is a 7. I look to the right. It's a 2, so it tells me my 7 needs to remain a 7. So if I was to round 2,726 kilometers to the nearest hundreds position, I would say 2,700 kilometers. So it's the same. That's a quick review of how to estimate natural numbers, but let's check out how to estimate or how to round decimals. Rounding a number means replacing it by a close value. We round decimals in the same way or the same manner that we round natural numbers. For example, A decimal can be rounded to the nearest unit or tenth. Here is how to round 4.57 or 4 57/100ths to the nearest tenth. So notice that TH, tenth position. Step number 1. Observe the digit to the right of the tenths digit. So they circled the tenth position, and we look to the right. It's a 7. If the digit to the right of the tenth digit is equal to or greater than 5, you need to increase the tenths digit by 1. If the number is less than 5, you just leave the tenths digit as it is. So we have 4.57. We looked at the 7. It's higher than 5. So we change the 5 to a 6. And finally, step number 3, we replaced all the digits to the right of the tenths by 0. So we changed the 7 to a 0. So remember, if your number to the right is 5 or higher, it could be 5, 6, 7, 8, or a 9, we round the number up. And if the number to the right of the position is less than 5, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, then we keep the digit the same and just change all the numbers to the right and make them zeros. Let's practice. Draw an X in the appropriate box to indicate if each number is rounded to the nearest tenth, unit, or 10. Okay, let's check this out. 24 and 61/100ths. Well, this one's a little tricky. There's no decimal point. When they rounded the number, they dropped off these two numbers. Why? They give us a little bit of a hint up here. So when we saw that we had 4.67 and we changed the 7 to a 0, look at this. We can see that 4.57 rounded to the nearest tenth is 4.60, right? However, you don't really need that 0 when there's no hundredth. So you can just drop it off and write 4.6. Both the values are the same. 4 60/100ths is the same as 4 6/10ths. Their value is the same. So here we had 24 and 61/100ths, but they dropped the decimal point 00 because the value is the same. 25 and 0/100ths is the same as 25. So I know that they changed the unit's position, so they rounded to the nearest unit. That one's really tricky. Good job if you got that one right. They rounded to the nearest unit. It's hard when the numbers start disappearing on you, aren't they? Okay, let's look at B. We have 5 and 32/100ths. So they rounded it and it became 5 and 3/10ths. So they dropped off that 0, and you notice that the 3 stayed the same because 2 was less than 1. 2 is not less than 1, is it? 2 is less than 5. So we know that they were rounding to the nearest. What position is this? Is it the tenth, the unit, or the 10? Well, it's after the decimal point, so it's the 10th, TH, 10th position. All right. We're on a roll here. 192 and 64 hundredths. They've rounded the number to 190. So they've dropped off the decimal point in 2 zeros. The 2 even became a 0. And the 9 stayed the same. Ooh, this one's a good one. So they saw that the 2 here was less than 5. So the 9 stayed the same, and they made the 2 a 0, they made the 6 a 0, and they made the 4 the 0. And then they didn't have to write decimal point 00 there. So the 9 stayed the same. What position is the 9 in? Is the 9 in the number 190? Is the 9 in the 10th position, the unit position, or the 10 position? Raise your hand if you think it's in the 10th position. Okay. Raise your hand if you think it's in the unit position. We're talking about the 9. No? And raise your hands if you think it's in the 10 position. Yeah, it is. It's in the 10 position. That one was very tricky. Good job for getting that one right. Wow. Okay. Moving on. 70 and 85 hundredths. So they've rounded the number to 70 and 9 tenths. So they looked at the 8. They circled it. To the right was a 5. So 5 tells us that the 8 was rounded up to a 9. The 5 became a 0, but they just dropped it off. So they're rounding to this position here where the 8 is. And on this side, they rounded it where the 9 is. So is that 9? Is it in the 10th position, the unit position, or the 10 position? Which position is the column that's to the right of the decimal point? It is the 10th position. I think you understand now. Let's try rounding some numbers on our own. So we have on page 60 at the very top, we have 34 and 14 hundredths. 34 and 14 hundredths. We need to round them to the nearest tenth. So I would write the number 34, 14. I'm going to look at the 10th position. It's a 1. I'm going to look to the right. It's a 4. The 4 tells me that the 1 needs to stay the same. It has to stay a 1. So 34 and 1/10. Some of you might want to put a 0 at the end, and that's okay. Others, you can leave off that 0 in the hundredths position, and it would still equal the same value. So our answer is 34 and 1/10. D, we have 7 decimal point 62. We're rounding to the nearest tenth, so I'm going to circle my 10th position, which is a 6. I'm going to look to the right. The number is a 2. So the 2 tells me that the 6 is going to stay the same. So I have 7 and 6/10. The 2 can become a 0. or you can leave it off. Our answer is 7 6/10. Way to go. I think you've got it. I really do. How about we try another 2 more, okay? Round each number to the nearest unit. We have 345 and 78 hundredths. So I'm going to write the number 345 and 78 hundredths. We need to round to the nearest unit. So the unit is our ones column, so it's the 5 here. We look to our right, and we see that it's a 7. Now 7 is higher than 5. So our 5 has to become, it needs to go up, it needs to round up and become a 6. So our answer is going to be 346. Decimal point, and to the right the number should become zeros. So it should be 346. Now you don't have to write decimal point 00, so you can just write 346. And the last one. 830 and 51 hundredths. 830 and 51 hundredths. We're rounding to the nearest unit. I like this one. It's a 0. Dun dun dun! What do we do? The same thing we've always done. We look to our right. It's a 5. Now remember, if the number is a 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, we round up. So if we had a 0, we round up to 1. So our answer is 831. And then all the numbers to the right, we put our decimal point, become zeros. But normally we don't write the number 831 as 831 decimal point 00. We just write 831. I know some of you want to start your homework and get going. That's fine. You can get going. Some of you, though, might want to try I at the very bottom. I just want to explain how to fill out the table, because some of us can become confused when it comes to tables. When you're completing the table, be sure to return to the original number. They always want you to start with the original number. So I want to show you just real quickly about I. The number is 100 decimal point 31. So if we need to round 131 hundredths to the nearest 10th position, I look at the 10th position, it's a 3. I look to the right, it's a 1. So I know my 3 has to stay the same. So my answer is going to be 100 decimal point 3. Do you see how I did that? But now if I want to round to the nearest unit, I have to go back to this number. Don't use 100 decimal point 3 anymore. They want you to use 100 decimal point 31 or 31 hundredths. So my unit position is the 0. If I look to the right, it's a 3. So my 0 stays the same. It's just 100. 131 rounded to the nearest unit is just 100. Now remember, go back to my original number. So I'm again at 131. They want me to round to the nearest 10 position. So look, it's a 0. So you circle the 0, you look to the right, it's another 0. So this 0 stays the same. All the other numbers become zeros. Don't forget your decimal point though. So 100 decimal point 00, it stays 100 decimal point 00. We don't write all those extra zeros after the decimal point, so it's just 100 again. This one's really tricky, which is why I wanted to show you. And finally, 100 decimal point 31. They want me to round to the nearest hundred position. So you look at the 1. That's our hundred position. You circle the 1. You look to the right, it's a 0. So do we round up? Or do we keep it at 1? Put your thumb up if you round it up. If you're supposed to round that 1 up to a 2. Okay. Great. And now put your thumb to the side, like you're hitchhiking. Put your thumb to the side. If you think it stays exactly the same, it stays as a 1. Yeah, it's going to stay as a 1 because the 0 is less than 5. So it tells us to keep it at a 1 still. So the 1 stays a 1. We put the 2 zeros in. Decimal point 00. But we don't need the decimal point 00. So you can just keep it at 100 again. So your answers are 100 and 3/10, 100, 100, 100. I think with that information you can complete the rest of your homework. If you have any questions, you can always come back, watch the video again. Try your best, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.